Who was Thomas Jefferson? By Dennis Brindell Fradin. Illustrated by John O'Brien. Who was Thomas Jefferson? Thomas Jefferson is pictured on U.S. nickels. He is also portrayed on the giant Mount Rushmore sculpture in South Dakota. The Jefferson Memorial is a popular landmark in Washington, D.C. Jefferson City, Missouri, and Mount Jefferson in Oregon are among the many places named for him. Why is Thomas Jefferson honored in all these ways? He wrote the Declaration of Independence. This paper announced the birth of the United States in 1776. Its stirring words, such as "all men are created equal," have inspired people for more than 225 years. Jefferson was a giant in many fields. A great statesman, he was our third president. A gifted architect, he designed Virginia's State House and the University of Virginia campus. People called him Mr. Mammoth because he collected prehistoric bones. His book collection became the core of the Library of Congress. Despite his many public triumphs, Jefferson's private life was often sad. His wife, Martha, died at the age of only 33. Only 2 of Thomas and Martha's 6 children lived to adulthood. Jefferson also felt guilty that he didn't live by his own words. The man who wrote, "All men are created equal," owned hundreds of slaves. And toward the end of his life, the former president landed deeply in debt. This is the true story of a man with many sides. Thomas Jefferson. Chapter 1. Tall Tom. Thomas Jefferson was born in 1743 on his family's plantation, Shadwell, in central Virginia. Virginia was one of 13 colonies belonging to Great Britain. By the calendar used then, his birth date was April 2nd. By today's calendar his birth date was April 13th. Tom came third in a family of 10 children. 2 of the children didn't survive infancy. So Tom grew up with 2 older sisters, 4 younger sisters, and a younger brother. The babies of the family, Anna and Randolph, were twins. Little is known about Tom's mother, Jane Randolph Jefferson. Far more is known about his father. Peter Jefferson was a prosperous farmer who owned dozens of slaves. He was also a surveyor, a person who measures land boundaries. In addition, he served in Virginia's legislature. Young Tom thought his father was the smartest and the strongest man on earth. It was said that Peter Jefferson once raised 2 barrels of tobacco that had been lying on their sides to an upright position. Each barrel was said to weigh nearly 1,000 pounds. He also loved books and read Shakespeare and other authors in his spare time. Tom had cousins named Randolph, who lived in eastern Virginia. Mr. and Mrs. Randolph died within a few years of each other. After that, Tom's parents helped raise the 3 Randolph children. Tom's first memory was of moving to his cousin's home, about 50 miles away, when he was 2. For much of his childhood, Tom went back and forth between the 2 places. Sometimes he was home at Shadwell. Other times he and his family were at Tuckahoe, the Randolph estate. In a way, Tom had the best of 2 worlds. At Shadwell, which stood at the edge of the wilderness, his father taught him to ride, swim, fish, and hunt. In eastern Virginia, Tom went to dances and learned to dress and behave like an English gentleman. But he apparently didn't get along with his Randolph cousins. The boy cousin, also named Tom, was 2 years older and seems to have bullied him. When Tom Jefferson was 9, someone else took charge of his cousins. Most of the Jefferson family returned to Shadwell. But to his disappointment, when his family went home in 1752, Tom was sent to study with Reverend William Douglas, near Tuckahoe. Reverend Douglas taught Tom Latin, Greek, and French. Tom studied and lived with Reverend Douglas for 5 years. The only time he returned to Shadwell was for vacations. Although his schoolwork often bored him, Tom liked to read on his own. He became so wrapped up in books that he sometimes read for 15 hours straight. Young Tom also loved music. He practiced his violin 3 hours a day. By age 13, Tom was a tall, thin, red-headed boy with freckles. He was well on his way to his full height of 6 feet 2 inches. In an age when the average man stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, Tom was almost a giant. His nickname was Tall Tom. Tom was home for the summer of 1757 when his father became ill. Peter Jefferson died that August. 14-year-old Tom was crushed to lose his father and hero. As the oldest son, Tom inherited much of his father's estate, including about 2,500 acres of land and about 30 slaves. But he wasn't to receive the bulk of his inheritance until he turned 21. Peter Jefferson had wanted Tom to go to college. To prepare for it, Tom lived and studied with another minister for 2 more years. He didn't much like this teacher either. But at least he was now close enough to Shadwell to spend weekends at home. By 1760, Tall Tom was 16 years old and eager to begin college. Chapter 2. Tall Tom in Love. Tom moved to Williamsburg in the spring of 1760. This city near the coast was Virginia's capital and home to the College of William and Mary. Tom loved college from the start. He was hungry for knowledge and enjoyed studying late into the night. One professor, William Small, befriended him. In turn, Dr. Small introduced him to his friends George Wythe and Francis Fauquier. Wythe was a noted lawyer. Fauquier was the colonial governor of Virginia for Great Britain. Fauquier often invited Small, Wythe, and Jefferson to dine at the governor's palace. Sometimes the red-haired college student played his violin at concerts hosted by the governor. Tom graduated in 1762 after just 2 years. Now he had to think about a career. Law appealed to him. In those days, young men, there were no women lawyers yet, studied with established attorneys. After a while, the young men took a law test. Those who passed became lawyers. Tom began studying under George Wythe. He couldn't have had a better teacher. In colonial days, lawyers generally had poor reputations. A few colonies even had laws preventing lawyers from entering their borders. Wythe, however, was famous for his honesty. If he thought a person was in the wrong or lying, he wouldn't take the case. Wythe did not go easy on Tom even though they were friends. Tom studied with George Wythe for 5 years. In comparison, Tom's friend Patrick Henry studied for just several months before becoming a lawyer. Even today, law schools generally require just 3 years of study. One reason for Tom's lengthy preparation was that Wythe was a treasury of legal knowledge. Another was that Tom liked his law teacher. He called Wythe, who was 17 years older than himself, my second father. In 1767, Jefferson was admitted to the bar. He began to practice law near Shadwell as well as in the capital city of Williamsburg. George Wythe had taught Tom well. His first year, the 24-year-old attorney handled 67 cases. This grew to 115 cases his second year, and about 200 his third year. Tom's problem was that he didn't press his clients to pay him. In his first 6 years as an attorney, Tom collected only a third of his fees. Tom also became interested in politics. In 1769 he ran for and won a seat in the House of Burgesses. This was Virginia's legislature. It was America's oldest lawmaking body made up of elected representatives. Jefferson served in the House of Burgesses until the American Revolution ended colonial government. House of Burgesses. The Virginia House of Burgesses met to decide local laws. Its historic first meeting took place at Jamestown, Indiana, 1619. The House of Burgesses played a key role in the American Revolution. In the 1760s and 1770s, its members began to challenge decisions made by the royal governor of Virginia. The Burgesses, as they were called, helped spur a unified fight for freedom throughout the 13 colonies. Law and politics weren't the only things on his mind. His family's home, Shadwell, burned down in 1770. Jefferson was in Charlottesville, Virginia, when a slave brought the news. After learning that his relatives were safe, Jefferson asked if all the property was lost. "Not all," the slave answered. "We saved your fiddle." The year of the fire, Jefferson began building a new home that he had designed. With his slaves doing the work, the 35-room mansion was built on a hilltop 4 miles from Shadwell and also near the town of Charlottesville. He called his new estate Monticello. The name means little mountain in Italian. Young ladies were also in his thoughts. At 19, he had fallen in love with 16-year-old Rebecca Burwell. Tom carried a silhouette of Rebecca in his watch. He had a pet name for her, Belinda. But he was too shy to express his feelings. In colonial days, young women often married at age 16 or 17 and men at 20 or 21. One reason the colonists married early was that their average lifespan was less than 40 years. It was common for people to die young from diseases and conditions that doctors can cure today. Tom saw his chance to propose marriage at a ball in Williamsburg. But when he danced with Rebecca, he could only say a few broken sentences, he told a friend. He met her again a few weeks later but only blurted out that he might want to marry her someday. That wasn't much of a proposal. A few months later, Rebecca married another man. Monticello. Little Mountain. In about 1767, Jefferson began designing Monticello. The design resembled buildings created by 16th century Italian architect Andrea Palladio. Construction began in 1770 and continued until 1809. Jefferson moved into Monticello's South Pavilion after his birthplace, Shadwell, burned to the ground in 1770. It took several years for Tom's broken heart to heal. Then in 1770, he met Martha Wales Skelton. She was a young beauty with hazel eyes and reddish-brown hair. Just 22 years old, Martha was already a widow with a young son named John. Martia Wales Skelton. Martha and Tom fell in love. He visited her father's plantation, the forest, to court her. The couple shared a love of music. They sang together. Sometimes Thomas played his violin while Martha played the harpsichord, which resembled a piano. According to a Jefferson family story, one day Thomas and Martha were playing a love song in the forest's drawing room. 2 other admirers of Martha entered the house. Hearing the duet, they knew Thomas had won her heart, so they departed. On New Year's Day of 1772, Thomas and Martha were married at the forest. The festivities lasted more than 2 weeks. On January 18th, the newlyweds set out by buggy for Monticello. They were hit by a blizzard during the 100-mile journey. It was the deepest snow we have ever seen, about 3 feet deep, Thomas wrote in a journal. They had to abandon the buggy and finish the journey on horseback. Not until late at night did the couple arrive at their new home to begin their life together. Thomas and Martha remained deeply in love during their 10.5 years of marriage. They also endured much sadness together. Martha's 4-year-old son, John, had been left behind at the forest with his grandparents. John became ill and died in June 1772. Over the next few years, Thomas and Martha had 5 daughters and a son. All but 2 of them died before the age of 3. Only their firstborn, Patsy, and another daughter, Maria, grew to adulthood. Chapter 3. We hold these truths to be self-evident. When he married in 1772, Jefferson was in his 3rd year in the House of Burgesses. Over the past few years, the 13 colonies had grown restless under British rule. England had been trying to tax the colonists. The Americans refused to pay. Britain's Tea Act of 1773 made things worse. On December 16, a group of people in Boston, Massachusetts, protested this tax on tea. They boarded 3 ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. The tea dumping became known as the Boston Tea Party. To punish Bostonians, Britain closed the city's harbor. This made it difficult for people in Boston to obtain supplies they needed. Boston Tea Party. December 16, 1773. To protest the tax on tea, patriots disguised as Indians boarded 3 British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. The British hoped the punishment would scare Americans into obeying them. Just the opposite happened. Many colonists, including Thomas Jefferson, were furious. They felt that the unjust British taxes had provoked the Bostonians. During this time of trouble, Patrick Henry made a famous speech. He said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Unlike Patrick Henry, Jefferson was a poor speaker. In fact, he often sat silently at public meetings. But could he write? In 1774, he wrote a summary view of the rights of British America. This pamphlet was his first major writing on politics. It revealed that he was thinking of matters far beyond taxes. The colonists might be ready to separate from Britain, he wrote. He even referred to the colonies as the States of America. Jefferson had another suggestion. On June 1, 1774, the day Boston's port was to close, the House of Burgesses should not do business as usual. Instead, Virginia lawmakers should pray and fast, not eat, to show support for Massachusetts. Jefferson's fellow lawmakers agreed to his idea. Lord Dunmore, Virginia's British governor, learned of the plan. He decided to shut down the House of Burgesses in Williamsburg. This didn't stop Jefferson and his colleagues. They marched to the Raleigh Tavern. There, they declared that Americans were one people and must stick together. They also proposed that a meeting of delegates from all 13 colonies be organized. This big meeting was held in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the fall of 1774. It was called the First Continental Congress. Every colony but Georgia sent delegates. Stomach problems kept Jefferson from attending, but Virginia's delegates included George Washington and Patrick Henry. If Britain kept mistreating America, Congress was to meet again the next spring. Britain didn't change its ways. War between the 13 colonies and Britain broke out on April 19, 1775, at Lexington, Massachusetts. The Second Continental Congress opened in Philadelphia at the Pennsylvania State House that May. Jefferson wasn't there at the start, for he had not been chosen as a delegate. But when a vacancy in Virginia's delegation had to be filled, his chance came. Jefferson set out in his buggy on the 250-mile trip to Philadelphia. By June 22, 1775, the tall, red-headed Virginian had taken his seat in Congress. Although he rarely said a word, everyone knew he had a way with a pen. He was asked to write some of Congress's official documents. Over the next year, Congress couldn't decide what to do. Some delegates didn't want to cut all ties with Britain. The war that had begun in Massachusetts would soon end, they hoped. Then America would return to British rule. Other delegates, including Thomas Jefferson, wanted to create a new, independent nation. As the war continued, more and more delegates favored independence. On June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia arose in Congress. "Declare America independent," Lee urged. Congress was to vote on the proposal in early July. A majority of colonies, 7 out of 13, would have to favor independence for the measure to pass. The Second Continental Congress. What if the vote came out for independence? Then Congress would need to tell the world why America was separating from England. A committee was asked to prepare a Declaration of Independence. Its members were Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, John Adams of Massachusetts, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Robert R. Livingston of New York, and Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. Instead of working as a group, the committee decided that one of them should write the declaration. Franklin, a world-famous scientist and statesman, seemed like the man for the job. But Ben was 70 years old and not well. Finally, the choice came down to Jefferson or Adams. This was a difficult time for Thomas. In early 1776, he had been away from Congress, during which time his mother had died. Afterward, Jefferson developed a painful migraine headache that lasted for 6 weeks. He did not return to Congress until the middle of May. So, on the June day that he talked with John Adams, he was not yet in a writing mood. Adams later recalled how each of them tried to talk the other into writing the declaration. "You ought to do it," said Jefferson, who at 33 was 7 years younger than Adams. "I will not," John Adams replied. "Why?" Jefferson wanted to know. "Reasons enough," said Adams. "What can be your reasons?" Thomas persisted. "First," explained Adams, "a Massachusetts man shouldn't write the declaration. Massachusetts had been the site of the Boston Tea Party and the war's first battle. Now other colonies should get more involved. Second, the other delegates liked Thomas more than John. A declaration written by Jefferson would be better received than one by Adams. Reason third," said John Adams, "you can write 10 times better than I can." The praise for his writing did the trick. "Well," said Thomas Jefferson, "if you are decided, I will do as well as I can." Jefferson sat down in his second-floor apartment at the corner of Philadelphia's Market and 7th Streets. He set up his portable desk and took out paper, pen, and ink. When in the course of human events, he began, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. As his pen moved, he became more inspired. A few lines into the declaration came the stirring words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Later he described how England had been mistreating America. He finished with a moving sentence, and for the support of this declaration, he concluded, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." If independence was voted down, the declaration would go into the garbage. Only if independence passed would the paper be needed. When the vote was made on July 2, 12 colonies chose independence. New York did not vote. However, several days later New York made the vote unanimous. The delegates thought that July 2, 1776, when independence was approved, would be considered the new nation's birthday. They were wrong. Congress made some changes in the Declaration, then approved it on July 4. Copies of the Declaration went out to the 13 new states. Americans loved the paper that proclaimed their country's birth. Since the document stated, in Congress, July 4, 1776, on it, Americans began celebrating that date as the nation's birthday. The 4th of July is honored as the country's birthday to this day. Did writing the Declaration bring Jefferson instant fame? No. Congress wanted the Declaration to be an expression of the American mind, as Jefferson put it. No author was named on the document. Until 1784, when a newspaper mentioned it, few people knew that Thomas Jefferson had written the country's birth certificate.
Chapter 4. Governor and Minister to France. Most members of Congress signed the Declaration on August 2, 1776.
Its author signed the paper Th. Jefferson. After signing, he was ready to go home. He missed his family,